Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to The Black Tower Show. I'm your host, Nathan Ford. I'm joined here by Jake Fox. We're in BC Studios, broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB, Brockport, Canandaigua, Rochester, Buffalo, upstate New York. And we just had a big storm up here. People are shoveling out their cars. It's gray. We're heading into that gray time. Black Friday. Well, you're gonna get yourself a $5 TV. Good for you. But you know what? We got work to do in BC Studios because you're listening to the Black Tower Show, underground radio for the inquisitive mind. Our guest on the Black Tower Show today, we've had him on a few times. You need to listen to him. You need to listen to the words that he's saying because he's been there. He's done that. And he knows what's going on, and he can help lead you out of the darkness, which is what we need right now. Paul Craig Roberts was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy and Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal. Columnist for Business Week, Scripps Howard Service, the whole nine. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
I'm pleased to be with you.
Let's start with your recent article, The Dying Dollar. This seems to be a common theme. Quantitative easing, dumping a bunch of money, fake money into our economy. And here we are. Everyone's riding high. Everyone's high-fiving each other. China's involved. Everyone's high-fiving each other. Stock market 1,600. Woo! It's great. Paul Craig Roberts, talk about the dying dollar. What's really going on here?
Well, with quantitative easing, the purpose of it is to support the balance sheets of the banks that the Federal Reserve has decided are too large to fail. It's just a handful of banks that receive the attention of 100% of U.S. monetary policy. And by buying $1,000 billion worth of bonds annually, split between U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, the Federal Reserve keeps bond prices very high, which also means interest rates are very low, essentially zero. In fact, they're negative if you figure in the rate of inflation, so that savers are losing money on their savings because the interest rate is less than the rate of inflation. But the policy greatly benefits the large banks because the price of all debt instruments moves together. So when the Federal Reserve drives up the price of bonds by buying 1,000 billion of them every year, it raises the prices of the debt-related derivatives on the balance sheets of the banks and keeps the banks solvent. And that's the purpose of the policy. Now, of course, the liquidity that the Federal Reserve is pouring into the banks is not getting into the economy. It's getting into stock prices. So you have a bubble there. Now, there's speculation about whether the Federal Reserve might taper, which is the word they use, that is, start cutting back on the quantity of bonds that it purchases each month. In my opinion, the Federal Reserve can't do that because if they don't buy 1,000 billion, then the prices of the bonds are going to fall, which means the interest rates are going to rise, which means the stock and bond markets would collapse. And the question of the bank solvency would arise again because the prices of the debt-related derivatives on their balance sheet would fall. So I think what's going on is that in order to support the banks, to avoid an immediate crisis, a crisis right now, the Federal Reserve is destroying the dollar because whereas the supply of dollars is growing by 1,000 billion a year, The demand for dollars is not. We're seeing other countries organize their payment system to avoid the use of the dollar, so that the dollar as world reserve currency is simply being abandoned. The large countries, Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, are settling their trade balances in their own currencies. So are China and Japan. So are China and Australia. And now recently, as I pointed out in the recent article that you mentioned, China has announced that it has no further need for dollar reserves.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Now that means it's not going to be recycling its trade surplus with the United States into the purchase of treasury bonds or into the purchase of dollar-denominated financial instruments. So this means, of course, that the demand for dollars in the currency markets will fall, but the supply is growing by 1,000 billion. This has to eventually affect the exchange value of the dollar. The value of the dollar will have to fall in relation to other currencies, which means that inflation will be imported through the falling exchange rate. For example, the United States is now an import-dependent country. 70% of the goods on Walmart shelves are imports.
Yeah, of course, Black Friday is coming up, so everyone's going to be waiting in line to spend their hard-earned money.
Right, to avoid a crisis right now, they're going to produce a dollar crisis in the future that destroys our living standards by pushing up prices dramatically. And of course, it's at a time when there's no job creation of any meaningful amount, and they're not good jobs. They're waitresses, bartenders, hospital orderlies, retail clerks. They're not full-time jobs in most cases. So,
and you're already seeing this happen, correct? I mean, we're kind of already in the throes of this happening. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. The job problem has been going on for a long time, a decade and a half, from the offshoring. The corporations send the high value-added, high productivity jobs offshore because that way they can capture the contribution that labor makes. They don't have to pay wages. They can hire Chinese and Indians at substantially below the contribution the labor makes to the profits. And they can do this because there are large overhangs over those labor markets. There's several 100 million unemployed people hanging over the labor market, which suppresses the wages. So by not paying an American wage to an American and paying a very low wage over there, the difference goes into profits, which goes into capital gains and bonuses for the managers.
Sure. I think it's important to note, too, that that's what it looks like for people on the ground. The prices of goods go up. Because people ask me, well, what does it mean for me? And that's the change in lifestyle that those people are going to have to endure. As the dollar dies, as you say, what it means for the regular person is that the prices of things that they need to live are going to go up. And keep in mind that this is happening simultaneously while the government is cutting benefits like people's food stamps, SNAP benefits, something billions of dollars being cut from that over the next 10 years. That's happening simultaneously, and it seems to a lot of people there's a war on people that are living in poverty. There's a war on poverty, and those people are becoming isolated, and it's a real problem even in this city, in Rochester, New York.
And more people are being pushed into poverty by these policies. So the so-called underclass is growing. The middle class is shrinking. And all the income gains are going to like the top 1% or half of 1%. So we see massive concentrations of income and wealth at the very, very top. We see the ladders of upward mobility being dismantled as the middle class is declining, diminishing. And we see the number of people hard-pressed growing. And everyone is being except for the 1%, everyone is being forced to draw down whatever savings or equity they have in order to live. You know, retired people who saved during the course of their life and expected to live on the interest on their savings, you don't get any interest income with the interest rates at near zero. Or, to correct myself, negative interest rates when you factor in inflation. So they have to spend their capital. They're having to spend down the savings that they expected to live on. So everyone is being pushed closer and closer to difficult circumstances.
Sorry to interrupt, but also, you know, because this idea of the death of the middle class and how important the middle class is to keeping the economy stable and real. It's something that's talked about a lot, but we have to keep going back to this point. Isn't it important that we have a viable middle class?
Well, see, the middle class was the way that the lower class could rise. If you were born in hardship, but if you managed to get some kind of education and you worked hard and paid attention, you could rise up into the middle class. And occasionally somebody in the middle class could rise up and become wealthy. And these were ladders of upward mobility, and that's why the United States was called an opportunity society. It was a very rare feature in the world. It didn't exist in most countries. In most countries, you were stuck in the class you were born in. There was no real way to get out. And so this was what was unique about the United States. It's why immigrants wanted to come here. And it's why you saw the stability that we had, because it was possible for people at the bottom to raise themselves up. And that kept social and political stability. But when you murder the middle class, which is what the corporations and the government and the Federal Reserve are doing, and has been doing, when you murder the middle class, then you destroy that stability. So you are exactly correct.
Are there any methods or actions the Federal Reserve or the government can take to save the dollar, or is it already baked in the cake that it's going to die?
They could do some things, but I think, and I'll talk about what that would be, but I think it is baked in the cake because it's been going on long enough for the rest of the world watching this and realizing they have massive amounts of wealth in dollars, and the dollars are being diluted by the printing press. You know, the Federal Reserve is operating as if it's a banana republic. And also, the dollar is not just the value of the dollar that people are worried about. The dollar has, as reserve currency, has been the way the United States has been the financial bully. It's the way it's been the financial imperialist. It's the way it can impose sanctions on countries. If you're the reserve currency, you're able to control the financial network. So you can say, okay, you can't use the clearing mechanism. Your banks can't participate. Okay, you get these sanctions. You get that sanction. And so the world's tired of being bullied. They're just really tired of it. I think even if actions were taken to save the value of the dollar, the rest of the world is just fed up with the United States and doesn't want any more financial bullying, and it's just moving away from the use of the dollar. And they're beginning to see that this gives them more space, more opportunity, more living room. And I think that the dollar would be abandoned even if some kind of sensible policy was implemented to save it. So I don't really know if it's worth talking about what they could do to save it. They're not going to, because the banks are more important to them than the dollar. And they'd rather save the banks, and they know that if they start working on saving the dollar, they've got to let the banks fail.
Well, we know that's
and
not going to happen.
Do that.
They're
not going to do it. Yeah.
But that's unfortunate, because what does the future look like for people now?
A dollarless world.
A dollarless world. What about things like Bitcoin? What about cyber currencies? Could that be something that could come up and help, have an egalitarian kind of way of, something different from the dollar?
Not if the government decides to destroy it or outlaw it, look, all the government has to do is buy a few Bitcoins and then dump them all at once on the market, because the price of the Bitcoins is so volatile. A while back, something like that happened. Somebody dumped a relatively few Bitcoins, and the market collapsed. So if the United States government wants to protect the dollar from the rising gold price, it can go in and sell naked shorts in the gold market and drive the gold price down.
Sure.
They pivoted down from 1,900 to 1,250. Then they can do whatever they want with the Bitcoins as well. Or they can simply say it's used for money laundering and terrorism, and we're going to arrest everybody that's got one. That's all they have to do.
So
I don't really know.
Right there, yeah.
Things like this can't survive unless the government accepts it and permits it. And if the Bitcoin is seen as an alternative to the dollar, they'll say, the hell with that. We're not going to permit that. We don't permit gold. When the gold starts taking over, we drive the price down. Well, we'll do the same to Bitcoin. Or we'll simply... So I don't think those things will happen. I think that what's in store for Americans is unemployment, or some kind of minimum part-time jobs that you can not pay your bills with, rising inflation because of the declining value of the dollar. So you're going to have an inflationary depression.
We're talking to Paul Craig Roberts on the Black Tower Show, broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB. Paul Craig Roberts was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy. You know your stuff. Joined by Jake Fox.
I don't mean to interrupt your thought there, but do you think the fact that Bitcoin, only 21 million Bitcoins can possibly be made, do you think because there's a finite number of Bitcoins, the value has a ceiling to it? Do you think that it's harder to manipulate and it's harder to destroy, by governments because of that?
No, I don't think that makes it any harder for the government to destroy it. No, the reason I think Bitcoin said they were only going to issue a certain number of the coins is so that they would have value. They're not just going to be diluted forever by issuing new ones and new ones and new ones. So if people, have confidence in Bitcoin, since the supply is limited, they tend to bid up the price. And that actually, I think, makes it harder to use, certainly for ordinary people.
What do you make of Bernanke and others, really embracing Bitcoin, saying it's a legitimate alternative currency?
Well, I don't think they mean it, and I don't think they've actually reached that conclusion. What I saw when that was discussed was all sort of like it could be seen this way. It didn't mean they were going to see it that way. And if they see it as a rival to the dollar, they won't tolerate it. Just like I told you, they've knocked gold down. So look, gold hit 1900 in 2011. Some 2.5 years ago, and ever since the Fed's been taking it down. So they're not going to say, okay, we're not going to let gold challenge the dollar, but we'll let the Bitcoin? No way. No way at all. They may simply think it's just not a big enough thing to challenge the dollar and not be worried about it. But if it does, they'll knock it out.
We're talking to Paul Craig Roberts on the Black Tower Show. We only have a few more minutes here, but I want to get now one of your articles here, the Kennedy assassination, and I want you to talk a little bit about that because you talk about kind of the illusionment of Americans not really listening to these facts that are out there. Talk about the Kennedy assassination, what it means to you.
Well, the Kennedy assassination has been studied for a half century by a lot of competent historians who have essentially given their life to that. And we now have a great deal of information. In fact, probably more than a person would be able to read in his lifetime. And what the information shows conclusively is that President John F. Kennedy was on extremely bad terms with the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Kennedy had not supported the CIA-orchestrated invasion of Cuba, the Bay of Pigs. He didn't provide the air cover that the invasion needed, so it failed. The CIA was just livid. Kennedy did not let the Joint Chiefs of Staff launch a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Joint Chiefs said, look, they got the bomb, but they don't have any way to deliver it. Let's take them out before they get a delivery system. And Kennedy said, we're not going to murder all these kinds of people, and how do you know what they can deliver? And he blocked that, and they said, oh, he's soft on communism. He's a commie. He's a commie. Or, like they say about Obama, he's a Muslim. He's a Marxist. Sure. So Kennedy became, not that I like Obama, it's just the way they talk about people. So Kennedy also rejected the Northwoods Project, or Operation Northwoods. You can read about that, which was a series of false flag attacks on Americans that would be blamed on Cuba so they could have regime change. And he worked behind the scenes with Khrushchev to defuse the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Joint Chiefs wanted to have a military showdown. And so they all concluded that he was unreliable in the war against communism, and these attitudes spread into the Secret Service. And so what the evidence shows is a conspiracy by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secret Service, and the CIA to murder the president. And that's precisely what the films show that the bystanders took of the Kennedy motorcade going down the streets in Dallas. One of the films shows clear as day that the Secret Service ordered off of the president's limousine, so all the protection. He's now open to a shot, and they ordered off just a few minutes before the killing shots. The Zapruder film shows that the shot hits him in the right front of the head and blows out the back of his head. It shows Jackie Onassis, as she later became his wife, crawling out on the trunk, getting the back of his head. obvious he wasn't shot from the rear by Oswald. So all of this has been known for years. The FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, told Lyndon Johnson that the CIA was involved. They all knew they had to cover it up, or Americans would lose confidence in their own government at the height of the Cold War. You can't go out and say, well, we know the CIA, the Secret Service, and the Joint Chiefs murdered the president. We were arresting them all. Well, then the whole confidence of the country in the government would have collapsed. They wouldn't have been able, in the minds of the politicians, to keep things stable enough to resist the Soviet threat. So this is essentially what the historians, and all I'm doing is reporting on what they have, what they've said.
Well, it means a lot coming from you specifically, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. We're talking on the Black Tower Show. I mean, you were there. You were in the White House. You were working there. I mean, you're coming out and saying, well, not at that time, not at that time, but you understand the culture there, and it makes me think about even when you talk about JFK and the CIA. Really, what I'm thinking about is that there's this internal warfare in our government. The fact that the CIA could have this power to order a hit on JFK, that you have factions within the government fighting each other.
Look, it's very simple. Anytime you have a secret police or a secret intelligence service, they can do whatever they want because who they're reporting to. Even their budgets are secret.
And you knew this to be true when you were in the White House.
Well, I knew that to be. I wasn't in the White House. I was in the Treasury. I knew that to be true when I was in the congressional staff because I was once a staff associate of the House Defense Appropriations Committee, which had jurisdiction over the military budget, and I had to have all these secret clearances so that I could advise the congressman. And it's quite clear that you simply weren't shown the black op budgets. Nobody knew what they were or where they were.
So it's common knowledge. I mean, this pessimism.
No, nobody in Congress knew what they were.
Yeah.
I doubt the president has any idea. I don't even know.
It's fascinating for people to understand. You understand that most people would find this absolutely fascinating, that the President of the United States wouldn't know what was going on in the CIA. I mean, this is you know.
The President doesn't know anything other than what he's told. And everybody in the government has an agenda. And they're not necessarily the President's. And these agencies have been long established, and, you know, they've got far more control over the situation than a temporary office holder. So,
well, this delicate system that we are in right now, I feel.
Well, you know, Eisenhower warned people about it more than 50 years ago, and nobody paid any attention.
The military-industrial complex.
Yeah. It really should be called military security complex.
Well, if I have some stuff, I want to protect my stuff. People protecting their assets, their land, their resources. It's a natural human reaction when you have stuff. I want to protect my stuff at all costs, and I will do whatever I can, and I will vaporize or destroy anybody who tries to get my stuff. This is a protection of assets at the very high level of people here that we're talking about.
I know, but, you know, ordinary people can't protect their property. They lose it all the time.
Of course.
Lawyers and corporations and developers, and I mean, they all prevail over individual property holders. And I think that there's really no elected office holder who would be a threat to these buried deep black op groups that have been in the government since World War II.
Well, that's why we're throwing our support behind you, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who's running Black Tower Show.
I appreciate your confidence, but I can't do anything about it except mention it. I mean, I don't know
You're
all
getting
the
the word
details.
out.
Oh,
You're getting the word out, and these interviews that, I mean, we're broadcasting live right now, and the interviews that we're having with you, thousands of people are coming and subscribing and listening to the words that you're saying. This is important stuff that needs to get out there, that people need to know about what's actually happening. And more people are knowing, and I believe that there is a tipping point happening somewhere down the line.
Keep in mind that there were two other reasons for them to kill Kennedy. One, he told his brother Bobby that as soon as he was reelected, he was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and that he was going to pull all American troops out of Vietnam. And this is a known fact. This is not, my opinion. This is all reported. And so you can see the CIA didn't want to be broken into 1,000 pieces. He was really fed up with them because of the way they tried to sandbag him into supporting the invasion of Cuba. And he was fed up with the Joint Chiefs coming to the White House to try to bully him into the Vietnam War, and he had given in more than he knew he should have, and he had decided to correct that problem because he said he can't do it until he's reelected. If he does it before an election, he'll lose because the press will say he's soft on communism. He won't support the Vietnam people in the South, and he's going to let the domino theory run. And so he said, I can't do anything until I'm reelected. So they killed him.
Yeah, they killed him. And what a tragedy. What a tragedy. And this mentality. And it kind of goes into this cost-benefit analysis kind of mentality where humans, this kind of sanctity for human life can't exist at this level that we're talking about. There's no respect for life or people's liberty or freedom. All of those things are supposedly not real in this kind of game that we're playing. He needed to be eliminated because he was a threat, and they eliminated him, and it was very clean, wasn't it? But unfortunate for America, which had to watch that, and gosh, I mean...
Well, it was an obvious cover-up, and Americans should be ashamed that they fell for it.
Yeah.
It was an obvious cover-up from day one. Because those films, well, you can see the Secret Service pull off the car. 6 agents. If they'd been there, there'd been no clear shot at him. And you see 4 walk along or trot along the side of the car, and 2 are sitting on the back bumper, standing on the back bumper, holding on those handles that are on the trunk. And so there's no way to really be... That's the way they protected the president when he traveled in an open car. And so we called them off, and within a few minutes of them being called off, he shot. The Secret Service was in on it. It's obvious. When you see the Zapruder film, you can see where the bullet came from.
Well, obviously, it's the same conversation that we're having about 9/11. And we've had it many times on this show. It's obvious, and there's a lot of things that are obvious to people like me and Jake and to you, and we see these things. But everyone needs to know this. Paul Craig Roberts, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We'd love to have you back on the show again real soon.
Oh, sure. I'll come back with you. Be fun to talk to you guys. And all the best to you.
You as well, and happy Thanksgiving.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right, bye.